Owen. Manaaki, ashes to ashes, the government's radical plans to stub out smoking by 2025, cutting nicotine levels, banning next generation smokers and slashing the number of sellers. We get a taste of just how many cigarette shops there are around our schools. A convicted murderer dies of a suspected suicide in jail. Housing developments are gobbling up our best food growing land, and shots are fired at one of Auckland's poshest hotels. The capital adopts a sinking lid policy on the pokies, and the super city introduces super smart meters to help people wise up to water wastage. And the countdown's on to the Olympics, but Japan's vaccinated fewer than 1% of its population.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The police are refusing to say whether anyone has been arrested for firing a gun in the lobby of an Auckland hotel this morning. They will only say they're questioning 3 people about the drama that unfolded at the Viaduct Harbour Sofitel around 9 o'clock. Katie Todd reports.
Dozens of armed officers rushed to the scene and guests were evacuated onto the street. A witness says he saw armed police later take a man out of the hotel and drive away. A ute believed to have been stolen was also towed from a nearby site. Shortly afterwards, officers swooped on a residential street in the suburb of Orake, where 2 men were handcuffed before being released. Ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
The Prime Minister has conceded she spoke too bluntly when she called an MIQ security guard a liar. On several occasions yesterday, Jacinda Ardern said a worker at Auckland's Grand Millennium Hotel had lied about being regularly tested for the virus. Official records show the worker went 6 months without being tested, despite a requirement to be tested every fortnight. Asked today whether she regretted her comments, Ms Ardern said she probably had been a bit blunt, but stressed that everyone, not just the government, has a role to play in fighting the virus. A mental wellbeing support program for primary and intermediate school children is being expanded to 5 new DHB areas. Manaaki was set up in Canterbury and Kaikoura in 2018 to help tamariki suffering earthquake-related trauma. It will now be rolled out at schools in Northland, counties Manukau, Bay of Plenty, Rotorua and West Coast. The principal of Homai School in Manurewa, Rosina Wikaira, says collaboration is essential to making it a success.
I really want it to be something where we can upskill and develop and grow our own leadership within this kaupapa. We don't want it to become something that someone comes and does it for us, then leaves, and we're kind of left high and dry.
There is no set date yet for a national rollout. A coroner has criticised the medical assessment of a man who subsequently died in a cell at the county's Manukau police station in 2014. Sentry Taitoko died from acute intoxication from the combined effects of methamphetamine and probable synthetic drugs with associated excited delirium syndrome. Coroner Deborah Bell says the assessment given by a doctor who has name suppression was not adequate or of the accepted standard for a medically qualified practitioner. She says the doctor did not ask the questions a doctor should ask. However, Ms Bell says her finding does not mean that had Mr Taitoko been adequately assessed, the outcome would have been any different. The government's plan to progressively raise the age of purchase of cigarettes for the next generation doesn't have the support of a smoke-free group. If legislation takes effect next year, 18-year-olds would not be able to buy cigarettes, and the age threshold would be raised each year after that. However, the Director of Action for Smoke-Free 2025, Deborah Hart, says there's already a smoke-free generation.
15 to 17-year-olds are already at smoke-free. There are only 3% of them who smoke. In the 15 to 24-year-old cohort, there's declining smoking rates. That's at 10% last year. They have the highest quit rates already.
Deborah Hart says it's more important to invest in public health campaigns. Nearly 80,000 smart water meters will be rolled out in Auckland over the next 4 years as part of the council's plan to drastically reduce water usage by 2050. Watercare's acting chief executive Marlon Bridge says the targets are very challenging but will inspire the innovation required to change.
I'm not going to put anyone under any misillusions about how difficult it will be given the constraints around or our need to deliver both growth and resilience over the next 10 years, but this is certainly a focus, and right now I can say we have to commit to it.
The aim is to have smart meters in all residential properties by 2034, and new homes will have to be water efficient. It's 4 minutes past 5. The two-time defending champion Central Pulse will be without their captain for the start of the National Netball Premiership. Amelia Ignacio missed last month's pre-season tournament in Otaki and hasn't trained with the Pulse in the lead-up to Sunday's season opener in Palmerston North. Chief Executive Fran Sholey says Ignacio remains on extended leave due to exhaustion.
We ensure our athletes are mentally well in terms of their home life first and foremost, so that when they're able to perform at work, they're at the best of their abilities. So until we get any indication that is all okay, she won't be returning to the environment.
Fellow Silver Fern Claire Kirsten will lead the Pulse in Ignacio's absence. Cancelling this year's Olympics remains an option, according to a senior Japanese government official. The Secretary-General of the Liberal Democratic Party, Toshihiro Nikai, says the rising number of COVID-19 cases could make it impossible to host the Games, and he questions what the meaning of the Olympics would be if it spread the virus. The Breakers are returning home to play 7 games in the Australian National Basketball League next month. Their last home game was in February last year, and they've been based in Australia since December. The first game in Auckland will be on May the 20th against the Sydney Kings, but venues are yet to be decided. That's the news.
The vaccine rollout picks up pace.
GPs will absolutely be involved in our COVID-19 vaccine rollout.
But GPs are confused.
There's a sense of uncertainty and lack of clarity about what that involvement will be in the second half of the year, and that is the problem.
While Pacific Islands are in a race against time.
They have a lot of AstraZeneca, and they do need to finish their stocks very quickly because the expiration date is very near.
Your daily injection of news, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Partly cloudy, isolated showers. Waikato to Kapiti, including central high country. Cloudy periods, a few showers, more frequent for a time this evening, and turning to rain tomorrow evening with possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with high cloud at times. Wellington, Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Partly cloudy, a few afternoon and evening showers today and tomorrow. Gale norwesterlies developing in Wairarapa tomorrow. For Canterbury, high cloud, few spots of rain today, showers and possible hail developing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, outbreaks of rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms for a time tomorrow. Otago and Southland, partly cloudy with isolated showers until the evening. Showers developing again tomorrow with hail from the afternoon. And Chatham Island, showers clearing early tomorrow, then cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen taku ingoa. The next generation of adults could be banned from buying cigarettes altogether, while at the same time older Kiwis could still be able to smoke to the grave, as part of a policy that would effectively cut off the supply of new smokers and phase out tobacco sales. The proposal is part of a shake-up aimed at reaching the government's target of a smoke-free New Zealand by 2025. About 29% of Māori smoke and more than 18% of Pacific people, although across the board the average is lower. The other changes being floated: slashing the number of tobacco retailers based on population density, licensing all sellers, setting a minimum price for tobacco products and reducing nicotine levels. Associate Minister of Health Dr Aisha Verrill says the way we're tracking will miss the 2025 target.
We won't reach our goal for smoke-free if we don't change our current initiatives. So we're currently smoking rate of about 11.6%, and the goal is to be at 5% by 2025. So we clearly have to do more. And one of the things is, there's a lot of inequalities in smoking, and for Māori women, they wouldn't reach the target of 5% until 2060 unless we take a different approach. So that's why we're putting fresh proposals on the table for how to get there.
OK, let's look at some of the specific changes proposed. Setting a cut-off date for selling cigarettes to the next generation. In simple terms, what would that be? How would it work?
Yeah, so currently we have a age limit for cigarette sales, and it would mean in practice increasing it 1 year every year, so that a generation would come through that wouldn't have tobacco. And you could do that either indefinitely, which would be the most extreme way of doing that, or you could do it just for, say, 5 years until the age of purchase went up to reach an age where people were unlikely to take up smoking if they hadn't already.
Okay, so the most radical suggestion there is what? That you set a date, and anyone who is not 18 by that date, they would never legally be able to buy cigarettes, correct?
Well, that would be, as you say, the most radical version of that proposal, but there's a number of ways you could do it. And remember, we're trying to get to 5% in the short term, so we're not really planning for policy, in 20 years' time.
Could you get away with that? I mean, what's the legal advice around that? Because basically you've got a product that is legally on the market, you can purchase, and people who are 18 or over, they're considered adults. Can you cut them off from that?
So a number of, so you can definitely set a different age of purchase. That is certainly something government is able to do. And I think the question is how far you can go with that, and we're interested in people's feedback on that question. But certainly we know that to achieve a smoke-free goal for the future, we have to do two things. We have to help current smokers quit, and we certainly need to stop young people from starting. And so the smoke-free generation is directed at that second part.
How hard do you want to go on this? How far do you want to push the boat out?
4,500 people die a year of smoking in New Zealand, and so I think it is worth having a look at changes that'll get us there, because that's a huge number of people.
So, Minister, are you saying that you're keen to make some radical changes here?
Well, I think 4,500 people in our country dying a year from a single product is an incredibly important public health problem to act on, and I've put forward proposals that I think in combination could give us a real chance of achieving that goal.
At the moment, it's estimated up to 8,000 outlets sell tobacco, smoking tobacco.
And Lisa, it's an estimate, because we don't even know how many outlets we have, because we don't have licensing for outlets. And so it strikes me as amazing that for a retailer to sell a sandwich, they need to be licensed, but they don't need to be licensed to sell tobacco.
So licensing, what powers would that give you then?
So, I think one of the things about licensing, it gives you baseline information of the market, so of the retailers, so that you can then make decisions about licensing fees, or you can make decisions about the density of licensed premises in particular, licensed retailers in particular areas. We know that's really important for achieving an equitable outcome in smoke-free. One of the really tough things with the inequalities we have with higher rates of smoking for Māori communities is that communities where Māori live have much higher rates of outlets of retail of tobacco being sold. So it's very hard to quit from an addictive substance when it's under your nose the entire time.
So tobacco companies targeting low socioeconomic areas and putting more product into those areas?
Well, there certainly is more product in those areas. I'm not sure how that has come to be, but it's a problem we definitely need to see if we can change.
So if we work on that figure that we do have, potentially up to 8,000 outlets, where is the sweet spot? Because you're talking about potentially reducing that number. By how much?
Yeah, so there's lots of different options canvassed in the document for how to address the density of retail, and some way we might approach it is by putting a limit around proximity to schools, for example, or the density of outlets in a particular geographic area. So that wouldn't be about the number, but the density.
Minister, is one of the options that you're looking at or considering limiting the sale of tobacco to pharmacies?
That's one of the items canvassed in the discussion document. What that does is that puts, again, it means that small retailers that, like convenience stores, dairies, wouldn't lose the sale of grocery items to to their competitors if they stopped selling tobacco. And also it puts, pharmacies are staffed by health professionals, so it puts the sale of tobacco in a harm minimisation frame and puts it more in line with say the methadone program, where people with an addiction come to a health professional to get tobacco.
So will they get a lecture with their cigarettes at the pharmacy?
They'll have an opportunity to, I should say that this is something we want to hear from retailers and pharmacists and other professionals on, and it is not the only way that we move away from sales through convenience stores. We could, for example, set up an altogether new category of retailer, a tobacconist, for example, as has been done in some European countries. But certainly there would be the possibility for more encouragement of quit if we controlled the outlet.
What's this going to do to the black market?
So we know that if we moved on these proposals, we would need to resource enforcement better, and both at the border, but also making sure that we've got staff looking at social media and other areas where to see if people are trying to sell tobacco online.
Tobacco industry has a lot of power, resources and influence. How are you going to know in the submissions process who is batting for that team and whether they're paid submitters?
We won't know through the submission process if they're a paid submitter, but I think we, in the course of a public debate on this issue, do need to make sure that we're doing due diligence on all the representations that are made about these policies, because we know that the tobacco industry has previously set up groups to advocate on their behalf while pretending to be at arm's length from big tobacco.
And that's Associate Minister of Health, Dr. Aisha Verrill. Now, if you want to have your say on these proposals, you've got until the 31st of May. And to clarify, the Ministry is asking anyone who writes in to disclose whether they have any direct or indirect links to or are receiving funding or have received funding from the tobacco industry. Now, one of the concerns raised is the closeness of schools to places selling cigarettes. 54% of secondary schools have at least one tobacco retail outlet within 500 metres of the school, according to research from 2016. That rises to 83% within 1 kilometre, and there's even more in disadvantaged areas. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Monroe went to test these claims out.
Popping out the school gates and getting to a place that sells cigarettes is all too easy, according to the new Smoke-Free Aotearoa 2025 discussion document. And in disadvantaged areas, there's 4 times the number of places to buy a pack than in advantaged areas. So, we headed out to a Decile 1 school in Auckland to see for ourselves. We're here at Manaaki College in Glen Innes to see how accessible cigarettes are to buy within a 500 metre radius. Just 350 metres down the road, less than a 5-minute walk from the college, we came across not one but 2 places that sell cigarettes, Fenchurch Superette and Fenchurch Liquor. A few kilometres down the road, transitioning from strips of shops to a much more suburban area. Glendowie College is a Decile 10 college, so does that make a difference to how many tobacco outlets are within reach of the school? Looking up the hill, I can already see a superette just a few hundred metres away. Locals in the area agree it's easy to get your hands on a cigarette, but are uncertain whether the government recommendations will make a difference.
Really just every corner. And dairies are quite popular in New Zealand, right? Yeah. So I guess it's very easy to get your hands on one.
Most of the people that use them are the poorer people on the front line, and they're just restricting it to chemists. Just reduces the access and makes it more black market. And you go to the dairies now, south, they're selling by individual.
Probably pretty good if they can wipe it out.
Dairies, they need this sort of products to sell, to make a business. And so if you're taking it away from dairies, you're sort of damaging local businesses in some way.
After driving around a 1 kilometre radius of each school, Tamaki and Glendowie, it was obvious Tamaki was filled with tobacco outlets and Glendowie had far fewer. For Checkpoint, Louise Tanuth.
It is almost 19 minutes past 5, and if you're listening to that on radio, you can check out Louise's piece online. We'll put it on our Facebook page. Now, we're keen for your feedback on that. What do you think about the proposals? Cutting retail outlets, raising the age to the point where basically phasing out the sale of cigarettes to next generation adults, lowering levels of nicotine, and as we mentioned, cutting those retail outlets. 2101 on the text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Already a bunch of you are getting in touch. This listener says, seems strange that the government wants to stop people buying cigarettes, yet alcohol can be bought. Very weird. Another listener says, wonderful idea about the smoke-free generation. Smoking caused so much distress to my family. I want my kids to have a better life. And JHC from Wellington writes, excellent ideas around tobacco harm reduction. I hope the nicotine limits will apply to vapes too, and obviously any future cannabis reform. Let's hope some serious action is taken on alcohol next. And Kevin's got in touch to say, I'm sorry, but there are more dairies, supermarkets and gas stations selling tobacco in areas where Māori live, ? The minister's statement is utter nonsense, says Kevin. Well, still to come on the program, we'll speak to Māori health advocacy group Hāpai Te Hauora on what they think of the ideas. Armed police swarmed on an upmarket hotel in Auckland's Viaduct today after shots were fired in the lobby. 3 people are being questioned in relation to the incident at the Sofitel. Officers later headed to a residential street in Manaaki. Katie Todd has been following developments.
An otherwise ordinary weekday had just begun for workers in dozens of office blocks and businesses along Viaduct Harbour Avenue when some heard the sound of gunshots ringing out from the lobby of the Sofitel at about 9 o'clock. Police say there were no injuries, but witnesses have described dramatic scenes. This man was staying at the Sofitel for 2 nights and had his breakfast cut short.
I was just having a coffee in the foyer and some breakfast, and all of a sudden there was 2 loud shots. Well, I thought it was a contractor working outside. Roger nearly fell off his chair, and then all of a sudden we were evacuated.
This witness watched from over the road as police officers responded in droves.
We saw a van full of police show up, as well as probably 4 or 5 other cars. And the first van of police went in with, at least 5 or 6 guns.
When the police emerged from the lobby, he says there was someone else with them.
And then they came out with someone who had been arrested. Then they drove off with 3 of them and the arrested person, and they've still got some cars here. The ambulances came and went too.
Police have confirmed 1 person is helping them and say a scene examination has been underway at the Sofitel. Investigators could be seen with clipboards and cameras, speaking to some of the hotel staff. Police ordered a white Nissan Navara ute parked at the entrance to the lobby to be towed away. Meanwhile, several kilometres away in the suburb of Ōrākei, armed officers and the Eagle helicopter were making a beeline for a house in Kete Moana Street, where police say they found a further 2 people of interest. 2 men in handcuffs were seen speaking to officers before they were released, with one returning straight to work on a digger. Police have declined interviews. In a statement, Sofitel's management, Accor, said its priority was the health and safety of staff and guests, and it was doing everything it can to support them. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
Eden Park could be turned into a short-term mass COVID vaccination clinic. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, and other health leaders have just been giving an update on rollout plans. He says in the second half of the year, there will be the need for some one-off booster events to reach tens of thousands of people in one hit.
As we go into that large scale up, a lot of the bulk of the vaccination will still be done through general practice, other primary care settings, the community clinics that are being set up to do, say, 1,000 a day. But then there will also be, I think, some larger scale events that each DHB, depending on its size, will want to run, and they may be the sort of 10 to 20,000 people in a day.
As well as more vaccinators, health authorities will be recruiting volunteers.
Particularly when we're doing these large-scale events, so you can imagine trying to do 10 or 20,000 people a day in Eden Park. You would want volunteers to do those roles around, in the parking, the sort of pointing people in the right direction, helping with taking details and so on.
And one of the heads of Auckland's rollout, County's Manukau District Health Board Chief Executive, Margie Apa, says they will soon have a lot more vaccination sites running. The focus for now remains on the priority groups, health workers, border workers and older Māori and Pacifica patients.
By the end of April, the Northern region aims to have at least 22 to 23 sites open to our community. That includes 16 large primary care settings, 2 super vaccination sites that can do up to 1,000 people a day, and local vaccination sites that can do between 300 to 500 that are aiming to be located in settings that are accessible. And if I take a couple of our first ones that we opened last week as an example, in Otara we were pleased to open a Pacific provider-led collaboration targeted at Pacific communities in the middle of Otara opened up, and they are now doing about 250 vaccinations a day. And Manarewa Marae, and they have been able now to set up a local vaccination site for that community. And on that first day, they were able to vaccinate as part of the test run Kaumātua and Kuia from the local community as part of their site.
Ashley Bloomfield says he's confident that 8 million vaccinations, 2 for every eligible New Zealander, will be done before the end of the year. Denmark's become the first country to stop using the AstraZeneca vaccine altogether because of the possible links to serious but extremely rare blood clots. With other countries, including Australia, limiting its use, there's mounting demand for other vaccines on offer. The ABC's Sarah Sedgey reports.
The global competition for COVID vaccines is fierce and supplies are strained. And that's not going to change for the rest of the year, according to Andrea Taylor from Duke University, who studies vaccine purchase agreements.
We just aren't equipped to churn out vaccines to cover every single person in the world within a 1 to 2 year time frame.
Adding to the difficulty, vital components and equipment are often made in different countries.
Those different parts all do need to be made and then brought together, and that includes crossing borders. We've seen a number of export controls and export restrictions put into place that's made that quite a bit more complicated. But it's also about the actual physical materials that are needed to manufacture those pieces of the vaccine. And those also generally have to cross borders. And also, we just don't have enough.
Dr. Liz Breen is a supply chain expert from the University of Bradford in England. She's the director of a facility being used for phase 3 trials of the Novavax COVID vaccine. She says there's good reason why vaccine components are made in different locations.
It's strategically planned to build on expertise to get the product made to reduce the risk of quality issues. But it does come with the caveat that actually if there's any logistical disruption in any country, then it could lead to delays.
She says a number of things can be done to increase production.
One of them is to have very solid contracts put in place in a timely fashion with the manufacturing partners. And that's obviously something that the UK managed to do quite successfully. So that is why we find ourselves in the position of having access to 8 different vaccine candidates. I think an awful lot of confidence comes from having domestic manufacturing capability, but that is only procured by having a large-scale investment in manufacturing facilities.
Australia is making the AstraZeneca vaccine, but it's not the preferred option for under 50s. Supplies of the Pfizer vaccine are arriving from overseas, but the extra doses ordered by the government won't come until towards the end of the year. Andrea Taylor says the worldwide vaccine rollout so far shows that nothing is certain.
From kind of April to June, July timeframe, we are expecting to see the capacity grow exponentially. You know, it's a very dynamic landscape as well. It's changing all the time. The AstraZeneca pauses and the Johnson & Johnson pauses have changed the landscape again. And so if the US is having to recalibrate their own supply based on that, and Europe is having to recalibrate, and Australia is having to recalibrate, then that changes the landscape again. It changes the demand. And so we may see actually that even with the scale up that's going to happen, it may take us even longer to meet demand than we anticipated.
And that report was from the ABC's Sarah Sedgey. Convicted murderer Vernod Scanther died in prison yesterday, soon after learning his appeal had been dismissed. It's thought the 33-year-old, who was serving a life sentence for the murder of Dunedin teenager Amber Rose Rush, died by suspected suicide. Scanther, who is a former doctor, stabbed Amber Rose Rush to death in February 2018 to stop her coming forward with claims of sexual assault, supplying minors with alcohol and offering money for sex. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown covered the case and Scanther's subsequent trial.
What we know is that emergency services were called to Otago Corrections Facility for what was reported as a sudden death just before 4 o'clock yesterday. An inmate was found dead in his cell, we understand. Corrections have confirmed this afternoon that it is Vernon Scanther who died.
Well, the timing of his death, what can you tell us about events leading up to that?
Vernon Scanther had appealed both his sentence and his conviction for the murder of 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush. That appeal was heard late last year, and the decision came through yesterday afternoon. It started circulating among media outlets around about 3:30 p.m, and as I said, just before 4, that was when emergency services were alerted to the death at OCF.
What's Corrections said about all of this?
Corrections was not aware of the decision when it was released yesterday. They've said that the court does not routinely inform Corrections of decisions that do not have an impact on the length of a prisoner's sentence. Of course, in this case, because the appeal was simply dismissed in its entirety, it had no impact on Scanther's sentence. Scanther was advised of the court's decision by a phone call yesterday afternoon. It was a representative of his legal counsel that relayed the information to him. Staff at the prison did all they could to try and save Scanther's life, and his next of kin was informed of the death by police.
So Corrections basically says it was unaware of this court decision. What's its normal practice? If it hears that there may be news that affects a prisoner, do they do anything special in terms of welfare?
The staff of the prison will take actions if they are made aware of information that will raise their concern for the inmate or has a potential to impact on that prisoner's well-being. They will carry out an assessment of that person's risk, and that will include checking on their behaviour or mood, or whether there's been any information coming externally that would raise concern for that prisoner.
Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the expansion of a school-based mental health program. Wellington Council goes for a sinking lid policy on pokies, but what will it actually achieve? And we talk to a Māori health organisation on plans to stub out smoking by 2025. Get in touch by text about anything you've heard on the program this evening. It's 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The police are refusing to say whether anyone has been arrested for firing a gun in the lobby of an Auckland hotel this morning. They will only say they're questioning 3 people. A witness says he saw armed police take a man out of the hotel and drive away. Shortly afterwards, officers swooped on a street in the suburb of Orake, where 2 men were handcuffed before being released. The Prime Minister has conceded she spoke too bluntly when she called an MIQ security guard a liar. Jacinda Ardern yesterday said a worker at Auckland's Grand Millennium Hotel had lied about being regularly tested for the virus. Asked today whether she regretted her comments, Ms Ardern said she probably had been a bit blunt. The government's plan to progressively raise the age of purchase of cigarettes for the next generation doesn't have the support of a smoke-free group. If legislation takes effect next year, 18-year-olds would not be able to buy cigarettes, and the age threshold would be raised each year after that. The Associate Minister of Health, Dr Aisha Verrill, told Checkpoint the government is interested in people's feedback on this question. However, Deborah Hart of Action for Smoke-Free 2025 says there's already a smoke-free generation. Nearly 80,000 smart water meters will be rolled out in Auckland over the next 4 years. It's part of the council's plan to drastically reduce water usage by 2050. Mass COVID vaccination events aimed at reaching up to 20,000 people a day are planned. The Director-General of Health says they'll be held in places like stadiums in the second half of the year as the vaccination campaign ramps up. 4 people have been arrested and millions of dollars in assets have been seized following an operation targeting large-scale commercial cannabis dealers. The police say the arrests in Dunedin and Southland come after a 6-month investigation. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susana. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen Takoingwa, and it is time now for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, we mentioned those two words, house prices, yesterday, but you have more news. Continuing to escalate last month, but what? Going to cool down?
Well, I don't know if they're going to. I think the pace of growth is going to cool down, but no one is really suggesting that the prices are going to cool at any time soon. In other words, whether they're going to drop. So what we saw last month, the Real Estate Institute's survey of housing sales and values, prices that they fetched, showed that there was a 24% increase in the price that houses were getting across the country, rising to $826,300. That's the national median house price. Pretty hefty. In Auckland, it's $1.1 million. And that's a big increase of 18.5% for Auckland. But, Northland had a 27% increase in prices. And the volume of sales is at a 14-year high as well. That was in March. And, with house value sales generating like 50% increase in Gisborne, and the West Coast, 120%. They're just changing hands as fast as, people are really getting in there as quickly as they can. Now, the measures that the government introduced, as well as the Reserve Bank's reinstating of the LVRs, that's the loan-to-value bank restrictions, is supposed to cool the market, but they're not expecting that to take place right away. We're probably going to see that over the next 3 to 6 months, as opposed to the next couple of months. And also because of this, a lot of the houses that are people want to sell their homes, but they're so afraid that they won't be able to buy another one that they're hanging on until they find one, which means there's even fewer houses in the market.
Like a stock, pushing
exactly.
prices
So
up.
People are afraid that they're not going to be able to get what they want, so they're hanging on. And that's just making there even greater competition in the market.
Sounds like a horror story.
It
Okay,
is.
let's go to Tilt Renewables. So this is in a trading halt. Why? Because people are scrapping over it?
Yeah. Well, everybody's looking for something, right? If you're not looking for a house, you're looking for Tilt Renewables, and they have a potentially superior offer to the one they have on the table right now, which is a $3 billion offer from a consortium in Australia, which would buy 4 of the wind farms there. And the other 4 would be bought by Mercury in New Zealand for $770 million. So that deal is now up in the air. Trading halt has been called because apparently Tilt has potentially a better offer. And it's interesting because Infratil owns the majority of Tilt, and it was subject to a takeover offer last year by Australian Super Fund. And so maybe the Australian Super Fund are going to try and buy it, buy the Tilt from underneath all of this other deal. So watch this space. We're not going to know anything until, at the latest Monday morning. So we may not find anything out tomorrow, but by Monday, hopefully this will all be made clear. Yes.
Okay, speaking of up-to-date market numbers.
Yeah, we ended down 115 points. Not sure if that's why exactly that's happened, because the market is definitely mixed. Australia was better. But look, that's a drop of nearly 1% to 12,637. The dollar rose overnight as the US dollar retreated. So we're at 71.4 US cents, and we've been there pretty much all day. The Australian 92.6 and 51.9 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business News. Wellington City Council has today voted for a sinking lid on pokie machines, even though most councillors agree it is largely a symbolic gesture. Councils around the country are calling on the government to give them the power to outlaw gaming machines in their regions. Ruth Hill was at the vote in Wellington today and filed this report.
That's the sound of millions of dollars going to local sports and community groups, schools, play centres and other worthy causes. But unfortunately, that money is also coming from those who can least afford it in many cases. Wellington City Council today became one of the last in the country to institute a sinking lid policy on gaming machines, the strongest action it can take under the current Gambling Act. That means no new machines, and if a venue closes down, the pokies go with it. Eastern Ward Councillor Terry O'Neill said of the 108 pokie machines in her area, the highest concentrations are in the suburbs with the lowest incomes and the highest Pacifica populations.
There is really strong evidence that we're taking from the poorest communities and putting it into the more affluent ones. And to sum it up pretty well, we're taking money out of Strathmore and putting it into Scots College.
Nicola Young was one of 5 councillors who voted against the sinking lid policy. She says while it's well-intentioned, it could actually end up doing more harm than good.
The reality is this policy won't make any difference to problem gamblers. It will drive it underground or it will drive it online. The one thing I would say is by betting in the pokies, some money stays in the community. When you go online, it's going to China or it's going to the United States.
Councillor Rebecca Matthews agreed the sinking lid was not going to save the world, but it might save some people from falling victim to the pokies, which is a particularly addictive form of gambling. To those who warned the move would starve community organisations of funding, she pointed out that Auckland has had a sinking lid policy since 2013.
And I do believe that people up there still play sports, go to, events, the arts are still, I'm not saying it's a dream scenario for every organisation all of the time, but it has not been a disaster.
Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons says she was horrified at the hostile tactics used by Pub Charity Limited in its submission to Council back in October. Using slideshow posts, Pub Charity boss Martin Cheer slammed councillors Fitzsimons, Iona Pannett and Rebecca Matthews for publicly criticising pokies while involved in groups accepting grants from gaming trusts. Ms Fitzsimons says this backfired and alienated some supporters.
That kind of threatening and intimidating behaviour doesn't work and actually has done them no good. It has made people very sceptical about the position they come from, and it has attempted to drive division and a wedge between those who support this and those who don't.
Martin Cheer is unapologetic, saying the sinking lid is political grandstanding.
Well, I think it's extremely disappointing that the council have ignored the evidence of researchers that suggest that the outcome of a sinking lid is not going to be to reduce harm. So it's sort of the worst kind of politicking that will come at the expense of funding to community groups.
Problem Gambling Foundation spokesperson Andre Frood says sinking lid policies don't go far enough, but they are a good start.
We'd like to see councils having a lot more power over the numbers of pokies, particularly in their poorer communities. But what we've seen with Wellington today is true leadership from the council, and we're really delighted that they voted to introduce a sinking lid and get the numbers of pokies down in the community.
Andre Frood is pleased Wellington City Council has also voted against allowing existing gaming machines to be moved elsewhere and to support asking the government to look at alternatives to pokie funding for community groups. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
Nearly 80,000 smart water meters will be rolled out across Auckland in the next 4 years as part of the city's efforts to solve its water woes. The rollout is part of Auckland Council's plan to significantly reduce water usage by 2050. Jean Bell reports.
Auckland's persisting drought, combined with a growing population and the looming threat of climate change, has jolted the council into creating a water strategy. Today, the Environment and Climate Change Committee opted to pursue a plan to drastically reduce the amount of water Aucklanders use each day in the next 30 years. It'll see smart meters in all residential properties by 2034, and new homes will have to be water efficient. Watercare says smart water meters will allow people to collect detailed information about their water consumption and see how much they're using. There'll also be an education exercise for businesses and residents on how they can save water. About 13% of water in Auckland is lost to leaks. The council target aims to reduce this to 11% or less by 2050. Some councillors took issue with this, saying it should be lower. Among those was Councillor Wayne Walker.
The targets aren't anywhere near realistic in terms of what we could and should be achieving, particularly in the context of a climate emergency. We're effectively adopting something that's subpar, really subpar.
Councillor Desley Simpson echoed these concerns, but she threw her support behind the plan.
But it's a terrible time for council financially, for our group family, to try and deliver on that. So, as I said, with regret, I will support. And the regret is only because I'd love to be more ambitious.
Richard Hills, who supported the targets, believes council-controlled organisations were often given unrealistic targets.
and then point the finger at them as soon as they fail. But we didn't fund you right, or we didn't give you the opportunity to say you could or could not do it. So I do think this is ambitious, but I also know it's doable.
Meanwhile, Watercare Acting Chief Executive Marlon Bridge told councillors the targets are very challenging, but will inspire the innovation required to change.
I'm not going to put anyone under any misillusions about how difficult it will be, given the constraints around or our need to deliver both growth and resilience over the next 10 years, but this is certainly a focus, and right now I can say we have to commit to it.
He says desalination is reducing in cost, but is still out of reach, while he expected water recycling would be caught up in red tape for the next decade. Council strategist Tony Shepherd says starting the ball rolling will pay off decades down the line through to 2050.
You've got your residential smart meters in place, you've got water efficiency education going on for that 30-year period. You're really building up the savings per person. That's one of the reasons why we're here today, to start that journey, signal that we're making those investments in things like leakage and smart meters in order to build up those benefits over time.
The plan is already able to be funded in the Council's long-term plan for 2021 to 2031. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bell tēnei.
It's 6:15, give or take a few seconds. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, we talk to a Māori health organisation about plans to stub out smoking by 2025. A mental health wellbeing program for primary and intermediate school students will be expanded to 5 more district health board areas. Manaaki started in 2018 in Canterbury and Kaikoura and was a response to the ongoing trauma some tamariki were experiencing following the earthquakes. Now more year 1 to 8 pupils will receive extra help if they're struggling. Our reporter Kirsty Frame was at the announcement in Auckland.
Students at Hormai School in Manurewa welcoming the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to their kura. She was there to announce the government's expansion of Manaaki, a mental wellbeing program for primary and intermediate school students.
Manaaki is a program that equips teachers with resources but also brings in wider experts from within the mental health, wellbeing and social service community to come into schools and work with children to meet their needs.
That could be help for students who are dealing with things like bullying, parental separation, grief and loss. So far, Manaaki has helped more than 7,000 students.
And now we're of the view, based on the feedback that we've had from schools, parents and young people, that Manaaki is a program we should make available more widely.
The expansion will begin in schools in the Northland, counties Manukau, Bay of Plenty, Lakes and the West Coast District Health Board areas. Hormai School is one of the first in line. 10-year-old head girl Brianna Diaz says they already get a lot of support from their teachers if they're having problems.
Because a lot of our teachers, they're really wonderful and they listen. They're not just straight up just telling us get over it. They help us if even if it's really personal. I think they will still be comfortable to share it.
Brianna's glad her teachers are going to be getting extra help to do that. She's also happy other schools in the neighbourhood will get the program too.
And it's really good because seeing every single kid just be walking on the street and have a big smile on their face.
How the program will work in each school is up to the teachers and district health boards. Hormai School Principal Rosina Wakaida says that sort of collaboration is essential.
I really want it to be something where we can upskill and develop and grow our own leadership within this kaupapa. We don't want it to become something that someone comes and does it for us, then leaves and we're kind of left high and dry.
County's Manukau DHB Chair Mark Goshi says the rollout will take about 6 months in his area.
We will work with the right people within our community to design, even within our own patch. You will see variations in the way you would do it in Pukekohe versus the way you would do it in Papatoetoe.
The Health Minister, Andrew Little, can't put a time frame on when Manaaki will be rolled out to the rest of the country. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Kirsty Frame tēnei.
The Police Minister says this morning's armed incident in Auckland was a gang conflict between the Mongols and the headhunters. Poto Williams says she's concerned by an apparent rise in gang tensions. She spoke to reporters in Parliament late this afternoon.
Yeah, it's pretty dynamic.
as I understand, an altercation occurred, and the police have taken a couple of people into custody and are looking for a third.
It seems to be a number of different scenarios, possibly, and people are drawing dots, right, that it's inflamed by a prior gang incident earlier in the week, I think it was. Do you know if there's a gang element involved here, and are you concerned about that?
Yes, there is. Yes, I am. As far as I am aware, between Mongols and headhunters. But as I say, it is dynamic, and the police are pursuing a third person, and they've taken 2 people into custody, as far as I can tell.
Are you concerned about the rising tension here?
I am concerned, and as we should be.
The Police Minister Poto Williams speaking to reporters in Parliament. 3 people are being questioned in relation to the incident when shots were fired in the lobby of the Sofitel at Auckland's Viaduct. The country's best land for growing food is being eaten up by housing developments. That's one finding in the Environment Ministry and Stats New Zealand's Our Land 2021, which paints a stark picture of the environment under relentless pressure. Our reporter Hamish Cardwell has more.
The latest in a series of environmental reports shows urban sprawl is swallowing up the small amount of good, productive land we have. Only about 15% of land is ideal for growing, think Pukekohe in Auckland, but the amount lost to housing has increased by half since 2002. Productive areas are often on the city fringes, right in the areas seeing urban expansion. Horticulture New Zealand Chief Executive Mike Chapman says the report is a wake-up call.
Every day we're losing highly productive land. I'm not surprised by any of the figures in the report, but it just underlines this is a call to arms. We need to, as a country, sit down and work out where we're planting houses and where we're planting healthy food for people.
The Environment Ministry says national policy on the issue is expected by the end of the year, but Mr Chapman says it's needed now.
I would have hoped it would have been out by now because, with the housing policy the Prime Minister has announced, you need the balance, and the balance being protecting land sensibly that is good for growing healthy food for our people to eat.
One of the report's authors, Dr Alison Collins from the Ministry for the Environment, says agriculture is being forced onto less suitable land, requiring more fertiliser and irrigation, which then pollutes waterways.
The worrying thing for me from the report is that it's going to become even more difficult to make those wise decisions when you've got a growing population needing more housing, but also needing a food supply, and then you've got a changing climate as well, so you've got all that uncertainty to try and wrestle with. So the decisions are going to be harder to make.
The report says while farming has become more efficient, there's been a massive ramp-up in intensification in recent decades. The number of dairy cows has doubled since the 1980s. There's now more than 6 million. And irrigation has nearly doubled since 2002, with the majority of it in Canterbury. Forest and Bird Agriculture spokesperson Annabeth Cohen says dairy is destroying the land.
Basically, if we continue to allow the fertilizer and irrigation industries to destroy rivers, soil and climate, it's going to be a dead-end road for New Zealand.
The report says population growth here and overseas will pile on market pressure to provide food and dairy to the globe. Annabeth Cohen says, we submit to these pressures at our peril.
I don't think that New Zealand, as a small country's job is to feed the world milk powder. The decisions that we've made have been poor in the past. We've got to think about how we preserve our environment going forward because, look, the industry depends on it and so do we.
Nationwide, 80% of sites fail soil quality tests, and the report says soil quality targets are not stopping the environment being damaged. The report's authors say the way soil is measured needs to change to be about its capacity as a living ecosystem to sustain human, animal and plant life. Dr Alison Collins explains.
A better measure may be soil health. This is a more holistic concept of the soil's ongoing capacity to function as a living ecosystem and sustain plant, animal and human health.
The report's authors say some incredibly difficult decisions about land use are urgently needed, and they will only become harder as climate change ratchets up. For Checkpoint, this is Hamish Cardwell.
American soldiers invaded Afghanistan in 2001 and almost 20 years later they're still there, but not for much longer. President Joe Biden is ending America's longest ever war. He will withdraw the remaining 2,500 troops by September the 11th, the anniversary of the attack that launched that fight. So where will that leave the millions of Afghans who live in a deeply divided country? The BBC's Secunda Kamani reports.
Victory, they believe, is theirs. As American troops prepare to leave Afghanistan, the Taliban promise to create what they call an Islamic government. But where does that leave millions of ordinary Afghans? We've been given rare access to their territory to find out. Early morning, we set off from the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. This province was once one of the most stable. Now it's one of the most violent. We're just around half an hour's drive outside the main city, and already we're in Taliban territory. Our hosts have put on a show of force. Their violent insurgency has cost the lives of tens of thousands of people. Through checkpoints like this, the militants assert their authority. And where's the government control then? US troops will be withdrawn later this year, but the fighting here will likely continue. Negotiations between the Taliban and Afghan government have achieved little so far. For the past year, you've not been fighting against the Americans, you've been fighting against other Afghans, other Muslims.
د دولت سره زموږ مخالفت په د اسلامي نظام دی چې موږ په جهاد مامور یو تر څو چې دوی زموږ هغه خبره مني.
Haji Hekmat is the Taliban's shadow mayor in this part of Balkh province. He gives us a tour of the area.
One.
Class 1?
Class 1.
There are girls. In the 1990s, the Taliban banned female education, and in other areas, there are reports they still don't allow older girls to attend school. But here, at least, they're supporting it. The school is funded by the government, but monitored by the Taliban.
بخاطر که گفت که علم بر مرد و زن فرض است برای ما این قمی گفت که با حجاب بیاین حجاب خود از طریق اسلام برای ما خود ما گفته باید ما حجاب رعایت کنیم در مکتب خوندنی هیچ کدام ممانعت برای ما نمیکرد.
Local sources told us the Taliban removed art and citizenship studies from the curriculum, adding Islamic subjects, but otherwise follow the national syllabus. The Taliban wanted to present us with a positive image. Throughout the trip, we were accompanied by them at all times. Residents we spoke to at a local bazaar expressed support for the group, saying they brought security. But later, we were told about villagers being slapped for shaving their beards or having stereos smashed for listening to music. Many, particularly in Afghan cities, fear the Taliban want to recreate their repressive Islamic emirate of the 1990s. Do you think that you did things wrong back then, and would things be different now?
چې طالب او پخوانی وسنه خو یو طالب دی البته افرادو کې خامخا تغییر او تبديل او څوک د چا طبيعت سخت وي د چا لګ نرم وي.
There's a diplomatic push for the Taliban to agree to a power-sharing arrangement. So far, though, the group has shown little desire to compromise. The price of peace may well mean giving in to more of their demands.
Secunda Kamani reporting. Japan's vaccinated less than 1% of its population, which is causing concern with the Tokyo Olympic Games looming. Organisers insist it's full steam ahead, but support for the Games is low because of coronavirus concerns. The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes has this report.
If the latest opinion polls are to be believed, these people in Tokyo demanding the Olympics be cancelled are just the tip of a very large iceberg. With coronavirus infections surging across Western Japan, 72% now say the Olympics must be postponed or cancelled.
Most of them are sick and tired.
One of them is Nobuko Shimizu, who's worried about the threat to her elderly mother.
We can't have Olympic. Definitely. My mother is 91, so she's very vulnerable to the COVID things.
Japan doesn't just have a very large number of elderly. They only started getting COVID vaccines this week. While the UK and US surge ahead, Japan lies far behind, with fewer vaccinations per capita than any other developed country. Experts say this makes it extremely vulnerable.
I think it is a very stupid idea to hold Olympic Games this summer.
in Tokyo. It is. But that doesn't necessarily mean it is impossible. If you ignore all the surrounding risks to gathering people together at the same time in one city, in the middle of the pandemic, it is not a good idea, scientifically or ethically.
With just 100 days to go, Japan is still struggling to hold Olympic test events. Today, this stadium behind me should have been bustling with activity, holding a big Olympic preparatory event. Instead, it is empty. Now, why this event has been called off is not clear. But what we do know is that 2 weeks ago, 7 members of the Japan men's water polo team, who should have been competing here today, tested positive for COVID-19. This week, as the Olympic torch relay reached Osaka, surging COVID infections there forced the cancellation of all public events. Instead, runners carried the torch around an empty park, waving to no one. It could be a foretaste of what is to come.
And that was Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reporting. Now, some of your feedback before 6 o'clock on smoking and the potential changes to smoking rules. Peter says it's a radical plan to criminalise more New Zealanders and hand tobacco to the gangs. Prohibition doesn't work for alcohol, meth, dope, heroin, etc., etc. The stupidity of not only continuing but expanding the war on drugs is mind-boggling. Obesity is worse for society. Ban that, Peter says. James says, epidemic of smoking starting now. My 18-year-old at uni says everyone smokes. My 16-year-old tells me kids are smoking in the toilets at school. Sound familiar? The new smoke addiction is nicotine liquid vaping. Lee says all tobacco and alcohol products should be sold only in supermarkets.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The police minister has revealed gang rivalry was behind the firing of a gun in an Auckland hotel lobby this morning. Dozens of armed officers rushed to the Viaduct Harbour Sofitel and guests were evacuated onto the street. No one was injured and at this stage no one has been arrested. The police have refused to confirm further details, but Porto Williams says it happened after an altercation between two gangs.
As far as I am aware, between Mongols and headhunters. But as I say, it is dynamic and the police are pursuing a third person and they've taken 2 people into custody.
Officers also swarmed a residential street in the suburb of Orake as part of their investigation. The sister of Amber Rose Rush says the death of her sister's killer will not bring back the loved ones she's lost, but it is a relief. 16-year-old Amber Rose was murdered by former Dunedin doctor Bernard Scanther in February 2018. Her mother died in a suspected suicide later that year. Scanther is believed to have taken his own life in Otago Corrections Facility yesterday after learning his appeal against his conviction was dismissed. Chantal Rush told RNZ his death and the dismissal of his appeal means the family can now grieve. She says nothing will ever heal the family's pain, but finally the stresses of court and future parole dates have been lifted. The Australian Prime Minister says the remaining 80 Australian Defence Force troops in Afghanistan will leave in September. Scott Morrison says the decision represents a significant military milestone.
Over the last 20 years, Australia has been a steadfast contributor to the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan. Australia has fought alongside coalition and Afghan partners to degrade the capabilities of terrorist organisations, including Al-Qaeda.
Scott Morrison became emotional as he read out the names of Australian soldiers who have lost their lives in combat. The United States announced earlier this week that all its troops will be withdrawn from Afghanistan by September the 11th. That's drawn strong criticism from some politicians, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who calls it retreating before the enemy is defeated.
There are no great outcomes, but this is the worst possible outcome. To pull up and leave and hope that things will turn out well. That did not happen in Iraq and it did not happen here. What do we lose by pulling out? We lose that insurance policy against another 9/11. We lose listening posts in the backyard of some of the most radical movements in the world.
Lindsey Graham says Afghanistan is a platform from where the US can monitor Iran and other countries. Mass COVID vaccination events aimed at reaching up to 20,000 people a day are planned. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says they'll be held in places like stadiums in the second half of the year as the vaccination campaign ramps up. He says as well as more vaccinators, volunteers will be needed to help at big events. Auckland health authorities say that by the end of the month there will be 22 sites running in the city. Transitional housing will be a key focus at Christchurch's redeveloped City Mission. Work is underway on upgrading the Hereford Street property. The City Missioner Matthew Marks says when completed, a 3-storey complex for transitional housing will accommodate 15 people. He says without transitional homes, the success rate for people staying in housing is about 50%.
So over the last couple of years, we've been trialling some transitional housing, 3 units there that we've had access to, and our success rate has gone for 80%. And so we know that from a housing perspective, that's a really big thing for us to be able to, I guess, enhance the opportunity for people to be successful in maintaining housing.
Matthew Marks says donations are still being sought for the project. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Breakers basketball side are eagerly looking forward to playing in front of a home crowd for the first time in more than a year. This season they've been based in Australia since early December, but with the opening of the Trans-Tasman bubble, they'll return to Auckland for 7 NBL games starting next month. Player Tom Abercrombie says being based in Australia has been difficult.
Trying to create a home away from home is much easier said than done, but that idea of getting to play back home in front of our fans is something that it gives you a little spark, and it's been a long time now since we've had a Breakers home game.
The side's first home game will be against the Sydney Kings on May the 20th. Lydia Ko is 3 shots off the lead after the first round of the latest LPGA golf event in Hawaii. She is tied for 7th, having carded a 5-under par opening round. Liverpool have been eliminated from European football's Champions League. They drew 0-0 with Real Madrid in their second leg quarter-final match to go down 3-1 on aggregate. The Spanish side will now play Chelsea for a place in the final. Manchester City beat Borussia Dortmund 2-1 in their second leg encounter to 4-2 on aggregate, and will play Paris Saint-Germain in the semis. And England all-rounder Ben Stokes has been named Wisden's leading cricketer in the world for the second year in a row. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the singer Dessa explains what's deeply human about our love of symmetry. Alison Balance catches up with the winners of this year's Prime Ministerial Science Prizes. Our overseas correspondent Lien Huang is on the line from Vietnam, and Dr. Rodrigo Martinez Garzoni teases out the science fact behind the fictional flick Back to the Future. Time travel's just the beginning. Was it the end? On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
The short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, partly cloudy, isolated showers. Waikato to Kapiti, including central high country, cloudy periods. A few showers more frequent for a time tonight, turning to rain tomorrow night with possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine with high cloud at times. Wellington, Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough, partly cloudy. A few afternoon and evening showers tonight and tomorrow. Gale nor'westerlies developing in Wairarapa up at tomorrow. Canterbury, high cloud, a few spots of rain today. Showers and possible hail developing tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, outbreaks of rain, heavy falls and thunderstorms for a time tomorrow. Otago and Southland, partly cloudy, isolated showers until tonight. Showers developing again tomorrow with hail from the afternoon. And Chatham Island, showers clearing early tomorrow, then cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tako wengwa. In a plan to stub out smoking by 2025, the government's looking at completely banning the next generation of adults from smoking with a staged phase out. On current projections, the government admits it won't meet its 2025 smoke-free goal, so it's asking for feedback on potentially radical ideas. Our political reporter, Mediana Johnson, reports.
With just under 4 years to eliminate smoking, the government is taking drastic action. They want to stop the younger generation from ever taking a drag by progressively bringing up the age of purchase. Associate Minister of Health, Dr Aisha Viral, explains the government's idea.
We gradually increase the age of purchase restrictions, so it's currently by 1 year every year, so that means eventually, say you'd have a group of people who wouldn't legally be able to purchase until the age of 25 or something.
This came as a surprise to Green Party co-leader James Shaw.
Looks kind of pretty out there, so we'd have to kind of interrogate that option pretty deeply.
He says he's never seen it used before.
Today is literally the first time I've ever seen that as a policy solution to anything. And because of that, we haven't had a lot of time to kind of analyse it or look at the evidence base behind it.
And one independent NGO says it won't make a dent in smoking rates. Action for Smoke Free 2025 Director Deborah Hart says they don't support the initiative.
We already have a smoke-free generation. 15 to 17-year-olds are already at smoke-free. There are only 3% of them who smoke. In the 15 to 24-year-old cohort, there's declining smoking rates. That's at 10% last year. They have the highest quit rates already.
60,000 New Zealanders would need to quit smoking every year to reach the goal of elimination by 2025. That's 3 times the number of people quitting every year at the moment. One way the government has proposed they can do this is by limiting the amount of nicotine in cigarettes. Dr. Aisha Verrill says it will drive them to alternatives such as vaping for their nicotine fix. She says it must come down to a very low level.
If it's at a moderate level, maybe say a 50% reduction, there's a thought that people just smoke more to make up for the nicotine. So for that option to work, it would need to be quite a low level. That's been explored in clinical studies. So if we were to regulate for that, that would be a very new approach.
Stella Hart is Chief Executive of Māori health advocacy group Hāpai Te Hauora and is concerned reducing nicotine in cigarettes will hit poor people, who are the biggest consumers of cigarettes, the hardest.
That's quite a contentious area because we don't want that to have a financial impact or an impact on those whānau, thinking that they might have to purchase, multiple packets more just to get that same hit.
She's alarmed by the persistently high rates of smoking among wahine Māori. They are 3 times more likely to smoke than any other population group. Ms Hart says addressing the reasons why these wahine smoke, such as poverty and stress, is just as important as tackling access and supply. Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi backs the idea and further measures.
We need some more aggressive policies in place to ensure that those things happen, and I think the supply is one of those areas. Taking nicotine, 95% of nicotine out of cigarettes, I still don't think that's aggressive enough.
He wants to restrict places cigarettes can be purchased, particularly in Māori and Pacifica communities, which has been put forward in the proposal. What's not on the table is further excise tax increases, which ceased in January last year. Ms Verrill says they have no intention of ring-fencing this tax revenue for public health. And British American Tobacco says the proposal will push people towards the black market. Consultation on the various proposals will close at the end of May. I parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
Stella Hart is the kaiwhakahaere of Māori Health and Advocacy Group Hāpai Te Hauora and joins me now. Kia ora, are the recommendations and proposals aggressive enough, do you think?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Yes, I think that what we've got in this document, out for consultation now, is some world-leading approaches. But I think that what we've got to be really mindful of is getting the community alongside us and with an in-depth consultation process over the next 6 weeks, hearing the voices of those most impacted, Māori and Pacific, will help us to guide and shape this thing so that it doesn't add another area of contentious, or it doesn't further perpetuate the harm that they're already experiencing because of the addiction to tobacco.
What do you think the most significant thing the government could do to help Māori give up smoking?
I think you have to really take a step back and you have to understand that Māori need to be in the decision-making seats at the legislative or policy level, because what we can see is, there's a heap of potential for investment into the stop smoking services or the sort of end-of-the-line stuff around supporting those who are already hooked or addicted to help them quit, and that's great. But actually, how are we building a bit of a dam upstream? What that looks like is tackling the tobacco industry and the tactics that they have. They've got huge revenue behind them that they can do some pretty swift media and marketing, but actually at the end of the day they're selling a product that kills people. It kills approximately 4,500. That's the whole township of Pūtāraru in the Waikato every single year. And so if we frame it in that sense. Why are we allowing this thing to still happen? So we need Māori leadership, governance, decision-making and all of those things upstream. We also need to heavily invest in an equitable ratio of funding at the other end to support those who are addicted. And then throughout that whole process, we need to understand and unpack all of the impacts of poverty, homelessness and all of the things that drive our people to continue to be addicted to tobacco.
You talk about the big companies there, right? And we know that, well, we don't know for sure, but up to 8,000 outlets that sell cigarettes. What do you think the strategy of tobacco companies is in terms of the spread of those outlets, if there's a strategy?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we can see there's an absolute saturation in our low socioeconomic communities of liquor outlets, fast food outlets, tobacco retailers. And so what they've done is they've cleverly placed their products where they know they'll make some revenue. I think that what we've got to do is we've got to really make it an even playing field. And so when we're talking about, or through this plan, it's talking about the decoupling of tobacco products with retail. And so that could be the local dairy, the supermarket, the gas station. And so we've got to, I suppose, support those locally owned businesses, especially our dairy owners, to ensure that they are supported in a way that makes it an even playing field. So if we can't have one dairy that can sell it in one community and one around the corner that can't, because then you will have an uneven playing field for them.
So, Salah, do you want it out of dairies altogether, put it in pharmacies instead, or something similar?
I don't know whether pharmacies is the right thing. I know that it would be really great from a quitting support service mechanism, but I don't know whether that's the right place. I also don't think that we should be coupling tobacco with alcohol, so that, definitely not into liquor stores. But I think what we might have to do or explore is making R18 specialist stores such as a tobacconist, and that might be harking back a few years to actually creating a new shop. But if we heavily reduce the amount of retailers that exist now, we're actually going to denormalise tobacco for the future generation. And so we talk about the smoke-free generation, pacing an age purchase limit where eventually some people will not be able to purchase. And I'm really, really behind that. I think it's a huge bold
Are you? Because
move.
some people say, some other advocates say that the young people aren't the real problem, that there are much fewer smokers coming through in those younger age groups. What are you seeing, though?
As a general population, yes, there is an absolute decrease in the overall population of young people smoking. We've also got to be very mindful of the vaping population, but where it's impacting most is Māori communities. So let's not, don't get me wrong. Generally, we might be doing really well across the stats, but we're not doing very well for Māori rangatahi, and we're also not doing well enough for Māori wahine. And so when we think about the special positional place that Māori wahine have, we are the holders of whakapapa. So I'm a Māori wahine, I'm also an ex-smoker. I'm a mother and I will hopefully one day be a grandmother. And so I'm absolutely behind this because I don't want my mokopuna to experience intergenerational harm of this killer product. At the end of the day, it doesn't belong on these shores. And I'm totally, I applaud Minister Verrill in the bold move that she's taken. It's taken a wee while. 11 years we've been waiting since the Māori Affairs Select Committee inquiry by our stalwarts such as Tariana and Hone and all of those that have come before me, and it is my duty to serve our communities that need it the most. That's our Māori communities, our Pacific communities, and our communities that are in those low socioeconomic communities. I have to do that. I am a server to them, and therefore I need to support every single mechanism and every public health policy that I can get to stop people dying, stopping a whole township of Pūtāraru dying every single year.
How much of a fight do you think you're going to have on your hands? Because submissions can come from anywhere, and tobacco companies, I'm sure, will have a view on this.
Oh, absolutely, because we are risking their bottom line, right? And if we are going to take some of these bold actions, we're going to be world leading, and we will then open up the opportunity for other countries to follow our lead. I think that if we lead this from an Indigenous perspective, because we know Indigenous communities across the globe are impacted the same way, if not more possibly, than what our Māori communities are, if we take that step in the right direction and be world leaders, that would be integral to opening up that opportunity for other Indigenous populations across the world.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That's Salah Hart, who's the kaiwhakahaere of the Māori public health provider Hapai Te Hauora. Now, a bunch of you keep texting us about this. It's an issue that you've got strong opinions on. This person says it sounds so strange listening to experts casually talking about adding another substance to the prohibition list. It's never worked yet. It will turn addicted smokers into criminals. Sometimes it seems as if the mainstream of our society are slow learners. Tony, though, says, yep, cut sales of cigarettes by reducing availability. It is a no-brainer. There are no health or social benefits to smoking. Dairy owners won't go broke, says Tony. Money will be spent on other stuff. Gary, though, not so much. Gary says, I wish people would mind their own business. 3 exclamation marks. People should worry more about being fat and endangering kids' lives from being overweight. Thanks for your feedback. It is 18 minutes past 6 and this is Checkpoint on RNZ National. In Nigeria, there's been a sharp rise in mass kidnappings of students. More than 800 students have been abducted by criminal gangs since December. Most of them have been released after negotiations. In many cases, a ransom is believed to have been paid, even though the authorities rarely admit that. The kidnappings, mainly in the north of the country, have been described by the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, as an attack on education, and several states have closed their schools. The BBC's Ishak Khalid reports.
I'm in a house in a slum community on the outskirts of Kaduna City, and I'm here to meet 18-year-old Ayman Abubakar and her family who live here. Ayman has been abducted recently along with nearly 300 other students from her secondary school. As she helps her mother with domestic work while her younger siblings play nearby, the shy girl dressed in long robes and a white veil tells me about her ordeal more than a month ago when gunmen forced their way into her school. They then made all female students trek for more than 11 hours in the bush to their base in a forest in northern Nigeria's Zamfara state.
We were all exhausted. We got injured. Blood was coming out from our feet as we walked in the bushes. One girl couldn't even walk, so another girl had to carry her on her back. We didn't drink or eat. Many of us were crying. Others were praying. The captors said whoever cries will be shot dead.
Ayman was released unharmed along with the rest of students after 4 days in captivity. Her family were traumatized by what happened and are so terrified of a recurrence. They are now considering marrying their daughter off instead of sending her back to school. But is desperate to continue her education despite what happened. She tells me she wants to be a lawyer to defend vulnerable people. Since December, more than 800 students have been abducted by gunmen in several raids on schools in northern Nigeria. There is still no clear evidence of links between criminal gangs that kidnap students for ransom and the militant group Boko Haram, which violently campaigns against secular education. But it is widely believed that the abduction of hundreds of schoolgirls in the town of Chibok in 2014 by Boko Haram has inspired recent kidnappings. Boko Haram has claimed responsibility for at least one big kidnapping incident in December, although the authorities dispute the claim and say that armed criminal gangs were responsible. I'm now in the Federal College of Forestry Mechanization, Kaduna. It's one of several institutions targeted by armed kidnappers. This place is now quiet and empty. I can only see 2 local security guards at the gate. Witnesses said when the abductors came, they opened fire overnight and forced themselves into this college and kidnapped dozens of students at gunpoint as they prepared for their exams.
What do you think should be done?
Across town, I met 24-year-old Gaida Christiana. She was among those who managed to escape during the attack. But the scars of that experience still linger for her.
When I sleep, I don't sleep well. Seriously, it's not safe. It's not safe. I'm not even thinking of going back there unless there are provisions that will be put in place that are going to guarantee our safety. If not, I can even forfeit. Education is for those that survive. If you're not alive, you will not go to school.
Many here believe that a weak security infrastructure has made mass abductions a lucrative source of income for the armed criminal gangs. The authorities, however, would not explain any practical measures put to protect schools. Samuel Arwang is the Commissioner of Internal Security in Kaduna State.
It's quite challenging. It is a threat to education and learning, but we are on our feet, working very hard to see that we overcome this.
What specifically are you doing?
Well, for operational reasons, I wouldn't want to undermine efforts that is being put into action, but I want to assure you that we are on our feet. We are doing all that is required of us.
Nigeria already has the highest number of children who do not attend school in the world. More than 10 million according to the UN, most of them in the north of the country. It's the region worst hit by the kidnapping crisis. With the growing threats of mass abductions, the education of a generation is suffering even more.
Ishraq Khalid with that report, and it's 7 years to the day since the Chibok girls were abducted by Boko Haram in Nigeria. 112 of the 276 girls are still missing. For some motorists, a Tesla from the world's biggest electric vehicle company is a dream purchase. But for two Australian customers, it's become a nightmare and a warning to others. They've lost tens of thousands of dollars to scammers while trying to buy their cars online. It's raising questions about how consumers can be protected from cyber criminals when making large transactions. The ABC's Amy Bainbridge reports.
It's the best-selling electric vehicle on the market, and Perth woman Andrea Hammond thought carefully before buying her Tesla 3 last year.
I did do my research, and spending that amount of money was not an easy decision either. But my commitment to wanting to drive without polluting the atmosphere was my motivation.
Andrea Hammond first paid a small deposit through the company's website and was emailed an invoice for the almost $75,000 balance.
I couldn't give anybody a bank cheque. There was no other way that I could receive the invoice or pay the invoice.
But cyber criminals intercepted the invoice and changed the bank details before sending it to her email account. Days later, she learned she'd paid her money into a fraudulent bank account.
It was absolutely surreal. It was just mind-blowing.
Tesla told Andrea the hack didn't occur at its end, but she says there was no sign her system had been compromised. The ABC has learned that a New South Wales man was also scammed when buying a Tesla. New South Wales police investigated, but couldn't establish where the hack occurred. New South Wales Police Cybercrime Squad Commander Detective Superintendent Matt Craft says he can't comment on the specifics of the case.
The way it was carried out is certainly similar to what we're seeing right across New South Wales right now. So you could replace one company name with another, and the way they went about committing that particular crime would be almost identical.
Tesla hasn't responded to multiple ABC attempts to communicate with the company. In Andrea Hammond's case, while she wrote Tesla as the name of the account she was transferring her money to, the BSB and account number she was given belonged to fraudsters and not the company. But the transaction still went through.
And that report from the ABC's Amy Bainbridge. With their habitat under threat from human encroachment and bushfires, koalas are facing an uphill battle to avoid extinction. Disease has also taken a toll on their numbers, but new research could hold the key to helping the animals develop resistance against deadly infections like chlamydia. The ABC's Nick Grimm reports.
Just careful with his claws. Careful.
A koala crying out as it's retrieved from just one of the fires to have raged through the Australian bush in recent years. This animal later died from its burns, as have many others.
Do you want to put them in the blanket and bring them out of the hot stuff?
Well, they've been in serious decline for quite some time with our changing climate, loss of habitat, and of course the fires and disease. And, hit by cars, etc., etc.
Shane Flanagan is Clinical Director of the Koala Hospital at Port Macquarie on the New South Wales mid-north coast. And she's hopeful new research might provide another weapon against one of those threats causing koala populations to decline. chlamydia, a sexually transmitted disease that can cause infertility and blindness.
Well, chlamydia is this horrible thing that just keeps chugging along all the time. There are two forms, the eye form, the ocular form, and the urogenital form. And the eye disease is relatively easy to treat in comparison to the urogenital, and that's the urogenital form is a really hard one to treat. So if Sydney Uni are potentially coming up with something fantastic, oh, wow, that'd be just so good.
And the answer to beating the disease in koalas may have been found inside the animal's own pouches. Tiny peptides that protect joeys from infection while their immune systems develop. Researcher Dr. Emma Peel.
An antimicrobial peptide is a very small protein that is expressed throughout the body in numerous different tissues that forms part of our immune system, acting like natural antibiotics. So these small peptides directly target and kill bacteria and fungi that invades the body.
And these peptides are produced by the mother. They're produced in her milk and they're produced in the lining of her pouch. And interestingly, the joey produces them themselves in their skin.
Study co-author Kathy Belov is a professor of comparative genomics at Sydney University. She's hopeful the peptide will one day not only help koalas beat chlamydia and a range of other diseases, but also provide cures for other species, including our own.
We think there's potential to use marsupial peptides to treat bacterial and fungal infections in humans and other animals. Quite often, those novel immunological protective mechanisms may already exist in our wildlife species, and by understanding them, we can learn more about infectious disease and how to treat it.
That report from the ABC's Nick Grimm. Some more of your thoughts on tobacco reform. This person says, what about homegrown tobacco? Currently you can grow 6 plants. It would be very hard to ban. That's from Jan. Jan, I didn't see anything in the document, but go online. It'll be on the Ministry of Health and check it out. GD's got in contact to say we need to also clamp down on vaping. There is no point banning cigarettes if we let the industry market new alternative tobacco products to the next generation. And this one on tobacco. This is a nanny state writ large. What next? No whiskey. Through tobacco, tax smokers pay for their health costs. And because they die earlier, less superannuation costs. On that cheery note, catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police minister has revealed gang rivalry was behind the firing of a gun in an Auckland hotel lobby this morning. The Associate Minister of Health says more than 4,000 people dying a year from smoking is reason enough for tough law changes. The sister of Amber Rose Rush says the death of her killer will not bring her back, but the family can now grieve. Mass COVID vaccination events aimed at reaching up to 20,000 people a day are planned. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
People wonder why farmers get a bit frustrated with government and stuff, because when you start looking at things and how things happen, you get a little bit cynical and go, well, might be virtue signalling here.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Why don't we know about New Zealand's relationship with Samoa when it was once a New Zealand colony?
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guest, Dr. Rodrigo Martinez Garzoni from the McDiarmid Institute. Yes, it's our once every second week materials, fact or fiction, the intersection